I never imagined that a single choice could change everything about who I thought I was. For as long as I could remember, I had lived a life defined by routines and expectations. Wake up, go to work, come home, act like I was satisfied with the shape of my life. I was always quiet about my thoughts, careful about my habits, and meticulous in hiding the tiny little desires that didn't quite fit the mold everyone expected from me. And yet, there was this constant, whispering curiosity that I could never quite shake. It wasn't about rebellion in the obvious sense, it was something softer, subtler, like a shadow at the edge of my life that I couldn't quite catch. I wondered, sometimes secretly, what it would feel like to express a side of myself that I had buried so deeply I had forgotten it even existed. I didn't know at first that hormones would be the bridge to that world. I didn't know that a few tiny pills could make me feel more like me than I had ever felt in my entire life. It started innocently enough, or at least I told myself it did. I had been reading about hormone therapy online, trying to understand what it meant, what it could do, and why some people described it as life-changing. I was fascinated but scared. My hands would tremble slightly when I thought about it, not because I doubted the science, but because the idea of finally acknowledging this hidden part of myself felt terrifyingly real. I had spent years pretending, adjusting, shaping my life to fit the expectations of others. And now, here was a path that promised freedom, yet demanded honesty. That honesty felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, peering into a world I had always wanted to inhabit but never dared to approach. I remember the first day vividly, the day I decided to start. I held the little bottle in my hand, heart pounding, and it felt heavier than it really was. It was a symbol, a threshold I was crossing alone. No one knew I was about to do this. Not my friends, not my family, not even my closest colleagues. I swallowed the first pill with a trembling hand, then sat quietly in my room, listening to my own breath, waiting for something. I didn't know what to expect, and that was part of the thrill and terror. Would my body feel different immediately? Would I recognize myself? I stared at my reflection in the mirror for what felt like hours that night, noticing subtle changes, a softness in my face that hadn't been there before, a flutter of warmth that seemed to ripple through my chest. It was nothing dramatic, nothing the average person would notice, but to me it was everything. The first whispers of a transformation that was more than just physical, it was soul deep. Over the following days, weeks, I began noticing small shifts. My skin started to feel softer, almost as if it remembered how to feel alive in a way it never had. My moods, initially turbulent and strange, began to settle into patterns I couldn't have imagined. I laughed more easily, cried more freely, and felt a curiosity about myself that was almost childlike in its intensity. It was terrifying, yes, but exhilarating in a way that made every other concern pale into insignificance. I started experimenting with clothes I had hidden away, pieces I had admired from afar but never touched. The first time I slipped into a soft, flowing blouse and felt it drape over my shoulders, I was breathless. It wasn't about anyone else seeing me, it wasn't about judgment, it was about recognition, the thrilling realization that my body could finally reflect something I had felt internally all my life. But with every step forward, fear followed closely behind. I had to hide my journey from everyone around me. My mornings were spent in secret, my closet became my sanctuary, and my bedroom mirrored a world I could only inhabit alone. And yet, that secrecy only made the moments more intoxicating. I practiced small gestures, tilting my head, adjusting my hair, experimenting with subtle movements in front of the mirror. Each day, I learned something new about the way I could inhabit my body. Each day I discovered a pleasure in simply existing as the person I had always wanted to be. I started to notice a confidence that wasn't loud or showy but quiet, deep, unshakable. I felt like I was finally waking up from a long, suffocating sleep. I realized that every choice, every small act of courage, was slowly reshaping not just my appearance but my very identity. There were moments of doubt, of course. Times when I felt like I was losing control or that I was deceiving everyone around me. I would see my reflection and sometimes panic. Was this me? Could this be permanent? But those moments never lasted long. Something deeper inside me, a truth that had been buried beneath years of fear and self-denial, kept asserting itself. It whispered that this was the real me, the me I had always been, the me I deserved to embrace. And gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, I began sharing pieces of myself with the world in tiny, safe ways. A subtle change in hairstyle, a different cut of shirt, a softer tone in my voice. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would raise eyebrows too quickly, but enough to start letting the world, and myself, see who I truly was. By the third month, the changes were undeniable. My body was responding in ways I had only dared to dream of. My face, my hands, even the way my muscles relaxed felt different. I was softer, lighter, more me. I looked in the mirror one evening, bathed in the warm glow of my bedroom lamp, and for the first time, I smiled at my reflection without fear or hesitation. There was a freedom in that moment that was intoxicating, a joy so profound it brought tears to my eyes. I realized I was not just enjoying these changes, I was falling in love with them. Every day, every little transformation, every new gesture or curve, felt like reclaiming a piece of my soul that had been locked away. I wasn't just becoming more feminine, I was becoming whole. And yet, the journey wasn't without its moments of suspense, those moments where fear and exhilaration collided. I would leave the house, experimenting with clothes that reflected who I was becoming, feeling the eyes of strangers without knowing their judgment, feeling the thrill of existing publicly as the person I had always been inside. Each outing was a challenge, a test of courage and identity. Every compliment, every curious glance, every small acknowledgement from the world around me felt like a reward, like validation that I was on the right path. And every time I returned home, I would retreat to my private sanctuary and reflect on the steps I had taken, planning the next ones, dreaming of the future I was actively building, one secret, brave choice at a time. By the time I had been on hormones for about 6 months, the transformation was no longer subtle. My body had softened in ways that made it feel more like mine than it ever had before. My face had taken on contours I had only ever admired in photographs, in magazines, in glimpses of people who seemed to live effortlessly in the skin I had always wanted. My hair grew thicker, softer, the color catching the light differently than before. Even my hands, my voice, the rhythm of my movements, all of it had shifted in ways that were mesmerizing. Every time I caught myself in a reflective surface, I would pause, just to take it in, to feel the quiet thrill of knowing that this was really happening, that I was really becoming the person I had always imagined. And yet, for all the joy, there was a constant, underlying tension. Every step forward felt like a secret act of rebellion, a private victory against years of suppression and doubt. I had to navigate my life carefully, balancing the excitement of change with the fear of exposure. I couldn't tell anyone, not my family, not my friends, not yet. The stakes felt impossibly high. I had been trained, socially and emotionally, to hide this side of myself, to tuck it away like a dangerous secret. And every day, I had to confront the fragility of that concealment. A slip of the tongue, an unexpected visitor, a misplaced email could shatter the delicate world I had built for myself. But instead of feeling trapped, I discovered that this tension added to the exhilaration. The risk, the secrecy, the thrill of knowing I was living a truth few could imagine, it became addictive in its own way. I remember one evening in particular, when I decided to test myself in public for the first time. I had carefully selected an outfit, a soft, flowing blouse in pastel colors, a skirt that fell just above my knees, shoes that clicked lightly against the pavement. My hair was styled in a way that framed my face perfectly, and for the first time, I felt a wave of pride instead of anxiety as I looked in the mirror. My heart raced as I stepped outside, and with each block I walked, I felt a strange mix of fear and liberation. People glanced at me, some with curiosity, others with indifference, and I realized with amazement that their reactions mattered less than the knowledge that I was finally living openly, fully, without apology. The sensation of moving through the world as the person I truly was became intoxicating. Every glance in my direction, every smile I returned, every small nod of acknowledgement from strangers, reinforced that this journey was worth every moment of fear, every risk I had taken to arrive here. The emotional roller coaster of transformation also brought with it a wave of self-discovery that I hadn't anticipated. I began exploring hobbies, interests, and styles that felt natural, not forced. I experimented with makeup, finding joy in the way colors highlighted my features, The way blending could feel like painting a canvas that was also my own reflection. I explored accessories, jewelry, hairstyles, fabrics, anything that allowed me to inhabit my body fully, creatively, freely. Each choice felt like a declaration of existence, a public announcement that I was no longer hiding. Even the way I spoke, the way I laughed, the way I walked through a room, evolved with a confidence that had been unimaginable before. I began to feel a magnetism in my own presence, a quiet power that came from alignment, from authenticity. There was a thrill in this process, a rush that was not superficial or performative, but deeply emotional, almost spiritual. It felt like reclaiming not just my appearance, but my entire sense of being. Of course, there were nights when I struggled with doubt. Nights when I would catch my reflection in dim lighting and wonder if I was overstepping, if I was fooling myself, if this was all too much. But those moments never lasted long. The joy of transformation, of finally seeing my internal self reflected externally, always returned, stronger than the fear. And as time passed, those nights of doubt became rarer, less threatening, almost nostalgic reminders of who I had been before I embraced this journey. I began to celebrate my body, my mind, and my identity in ways I never had before. Every curve, every softened feature, every subtle shift in demeanor was not just a change, it was a triumph, a tangible proof that courage and honesty could reshape a life. By the time I reached 9 months on hormones, the transformation had become almost seamless. My friends, oblivious to the depth of the journey I was on, noticed subtle changes. My hair seemed different, my skin glowed, my demeanor carried a newfound softness and warmth. I reveled in the ambiguity of their curiosity, knowing the truth was mine alone. At work, I began experimenting with a slightly more feminine presentation. I wasn't bold, there was still caution, still care, but the small choices mattered. A different blouse here, a scarf there, subtle makeup just to accentuate my features without drawing overt attention. And every time I did, I felt a surge of exhilaration, the thrill of living authentically in the spaces I had once felt confined in. The world hadn't rejected me, it hadn't even noticed yet, and that gave me confidence. I was learning that my identity didn't need permission from anyone. I was allowed to exist, fully, unapologetically, and it was the most liberating feeling imaginable. And with liberation came reflection. I started thinking about how far I had come, how many layers of fear and doubt I had peeled away to reach this point. I remembered the nights of self-doubt, the moments of panic, the small victories that had felt monumental at the time. I remembered the thrill of slipping into my first feminine outfit, the wonder of seeing my reflection begin to align with my inner vision, and the joy of stepping out into the world, heart pounding, and existing fully as me. Each step had been a triumph, each pill, each choice, each small act of courage contributing to a metamorphosis that was as emotional and psychological as it was physical. I realized that the transformation was not just about becoming more feminine, it was about becoming more me, more honest, more alive than I had ever been. By the time a full year had passed since I began hormones, the transformation was undeniable, not just to me, but to the people around me. My body had fully adapted, my features softened and reshaped, my movements naturally fluid. Even my voice, which I had worked on for months in secret, carried a tone that felt inherently mine. It wasn't just the physical changes that mattered, it was the way I carried myself, the subtle confidence that radiated without effort, the quiet grace that now seemed inseparable from my being. I had become someone I could not have imagined a year ago. A person whose identity finally matched the long-suppressed vision I had always carried inside. I felt more complete, more alive, more visible than ever before. And yet, as exciting as this freedom was, the world outside my room remained a complicated place. There were moments of anxiety, especially around those I cared about most. Would my family understand? Could I ever explain to my friends that the person they had known for years was evolving into someone entirely new? The thought of confrontation, misunderstanding, or even rejection loomed in the background, but strangely, it no longer paralyzed me. I had lived in fear long enough. I had spent so many years silencing a part of myself that I had forgotten how it felt to breathe freely. And now that I had tasted authenticity, I couldn't, and wouldn't, turn back. The risk of exposure became a challenge to navigate rather than a reason to hide. I learned to walk with poise, to respond to questions with composure, to let the world observe my transformation without needing to explain it immediately. That balance of secrecy and revelation became a thrilling dance, a private thrill that fueled my courage and sense of self. The reactions from others, when they did occur, were fascinating. Sometimes, it was a subtle change in behavior, a double take, a lingering glance. Other times, it was an innocent compliment, a kind acknowledgement that seemed small but felt monumental to me. Each interaction reminded me that the world was more receptive than I had imagined, more accepting than my internal fears had predicted. I began testing boundaries carefully, wearing outfits that expressed my femininity fully, stepping into spaces that had once felt intimidating or off-limits. Every outing became a new adventure, a chance to affirm myself and explore the newfound freedom that hormones had granted me. I learned to move through life with awareness, yet without shame, embracing each moment as both an experiment and a celebration. The thrill of transformation had become a lens through which I saw the world, rich with possibilities and hidden wonders. Emotionally, I was evolving just as profoundly as physically. I discovered depths of empathy, vulnerability, and self-compassion that I had never allowed myself to explore before. Hormones had triggered changes in my mind as well as my body, shifts in mood, perspective, and self-perception that forced me to confront truths I had long ignored. I began journaling, reflecting on each stage of the journey, noting how my emotions intertwined with my physical evolution. Writing became a catharsis, a way to articulate the complex, sometimes contradictory feelings that came with such a profound transformation. I realized that this was not a temporary experiment or a superficial change. It was a lifelong path towards self-actualization, a chance to reclaim a sense of wholeness that had been denied to me for decades. And for the first time, I felt truly proud of myself, not in a boastful way, but in the quiet, deeply satisfying way that comes from embracing one's authenticity without apology. There were, naturally, moments of tension and doubt. Hormones are not a magic switch. They bring joy, yes, but also introspection, mood swings, and an unflinching awareness of the world around you. I had days when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, whether this journey was sustainable, whether I could reconcile the life I had built with the person I was becoming. But those days were always fleeting, eclipsed by the overwhelming sense of liberation that came with every small victory. Each time I experimented with a new outfit, hairstyle, or mannerism, I felt the thrill of authenticity. Each moment of self-expression reinforced the truth I had discovered months earlier, that the person I had always been was finally stepping forward, fully, unapologetically, and beautifully. It was intoxicating, addictive, transformative in ways I had never anticipated. By this point, I had developed a rhythm, a daily ritual that balanced self-care, presentation, and exploration. Mornings were my sanctuary, time to dress, to style, to engage in small but meaningful acts that affirmed my identity. Afternoons and evenings became opportunities to interact with the world, cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence. I experimented with makeup more boldly, chose colors and fabrics that expressed moods and personality, and discovered joy in the minute details of personal aesthetics. The way a necklace rested against my collarbone, the soft sway of a skirt as I walked, the gentle framing of my hair around my face. Each detail was a declaration, a testament to the person I had become and the courage it had taken to arrive there. Socially, I began to explore connections that felt authentic, seeking out spaces where I could exist fully without pretense. I met others who had walked similar paths, whose experiences echoed mine in surprising ways. Sharing our stories became a form of validation, a reminder that I was not alone, that the journey toward self-realization was a shared human experience. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of jealousy, of comparison, of fear, but these were balanced by the overwhelming joy of community, understanding, and acceptance. Slowly, cautiously, I began revealing pieces of my journey to select friends, watching their reactions, gauging their responses. Some were stunned, some confused, but most were supportive in ways I hadn't dared to hope. Every positive interaction reinforced the lesson I had been learning all along, that living authentically was not just liberating for me, it could inspire and challenge the world around me as well. And yet, despite all the external validation, the most profound shifts were internal. I was learning to love myself in ways I had never known were possible. The reflection in the mirror no longer caused anxiety or fear. It inspired pride, curiosity, and affection. I explored the subtleties of my identity with joy, embracing contradictions, fluidity, and growth. Hormones had done more than change my body. They had unlocked a door to self-acceptance that I had spent decades trying to find in other ways. And in that unlocked space, I discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed. The courage to be fully visible, the resilience to navigate uncertainty, and the capacity for joy that had been waiting patiently all along. The year turned into 18 months, and by this time, my transformation was no longer a secret even to myself. I had fully integrated the changes into my daily life, and the boundaries I had once tiptoed around felt increasingly unnecessary. There was a profound sense of ownership over my own existence, a freedom that I had only glimpsed in fleeting moments at the beginning of my journey. My body, my mind, my spirit, all had aligned in a way that felt complete, whole, and deeply satisfying. I could no longer imagine returning to the person I had been before, trapped in fear, hiding, constantly censoring myself. The old life felt foreign, almost like someone else's memory. And for the first time, I realized something extraordinary. I didn't just accept myself, I loved myself in a way I had never dared to before. By this point, my courage had grown beyond private exploration. I began to venture into the world more openly, choosing outfits and styles that fully expressed my femininity, not subtly, not cautiously, but with an unflinching celebration of who I had become. Each outing, whether to a cafe, a store, or just a walk through the city, became a personal affirmation. I noticed the world looking back at me differently, not because I had changed fundamentally, but because I was presenting myself authentically, confidently, unapologetically. The way people responded, the curious glances, the small smiles, and even the brief moments of judgment, all felt like part of the exhilarating dance of living openly. And for the first time, I truly understood what it meant to inhabit my own life fully, without compromise or apology. Emotionally, the journey had given me depths of self-awareness I could never have imagined. I learned to navigate vulnerability with grace, to face fear with determination, and to embrace uncertainty with curiosity. The changes were not always easy. There were setbacks, emotional waves, moments of doubt, but those moments only deepened my understanding of myself. Each challenge became a lesson, each fear a stepping stone, and each triumph a reminder of the power of persistence and honesty. I realized that transformation is not merely about physical appearance, it is about aligning mind, body, and spirit in a harmonious, authentic expression of self. The hormones had catalyzed this change, but the courage, the introspection, and the joy were entirely mine. Relationships, too, evolved in profound ways. Friends who had once known me as someone cautious and reserved began seeing a different side, a vibrant, expressive, and confident person who moved through the world with warmth and openness. I began sharing my journey more openly, first with trusted individuals, and later more broadly, gauging reactions, and finding support I hadn't imagined possible. Some people struggled to understand, but others were moved, inspired, even curious in ways that reinforced my own sense of self-worth. I realized that living authentically has a ripple effect. It doesn't just change the individual, it affects the world around them, subtly, powerfully. And in witnessing the acceptance and encouragement of others, I felt a profound connection, a sense of belonging that I had longed for without realizing it. There were moments of surreal joy that I can still recall vividly. I remember standing in front of a mirror one morning, dressed in a flowing dress, hair falling softly around my shoulders, feeling a sense of awe I had never experienced before. It wasn't vanity, it was reverence for the journey I had undertaken, for the courage it had taken to reach this point, and for the life I was now living authentically. I marveled at the subtle curves, the softness of my features, the way light played across my face, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the science that made this possible, for the courage that carried me through fear, and for the quiet, persistent desire inside me that refused to be silenced. I was no longer just existing, I was thriving. The transformation had also taught me patience and humility. Every small step mattered, every subtle shift had significance, and nothing about this process could be rushed. I learned to celebrate incremental victories, to savor quiet moments of self-discovery, and to approach each stage of growth with intentionality and care. The hormones had catalyzed change, but it was my dedication, curiosity, and emotional resilience that allowed me to integrate those changes fully into my life. And as I reflected on the journey, I realized that transformation is not a destination. It is a continuous process, a commitment to self-exploration, authenticity, and courage that lasts a lifetime. One of the most profound lessons I took away was the importance of honesty, with myself and eventually with others. Living authentically demanded truth, and truth demanded courage. I had to confront fears, face uncertainty, and accept the possibility of rejection. And yet, in doing so, I discovered an inner strength and resilience I had never known. I realized that fear is temporary, but the reward of living as your true self is enduring, transformative, and deeply fulfilling. I had spent years confined by doubt and expectation, and now I moved through the world with confidence, pride, and joy that radiated from every gesture, every smile, every glance in the mirror. By the 2-year mark, I had fully embraced my new life. I moved confidently in spaces that once intimidated me, expressed myself in ways that once seemed impossible, and nurtured relationships that celebrated authenticity. I no longer hid, no longer whispered, no longer feared. My journey had become a story not just of physical transformation, but of emotional awakening, of courage, and of self-love. I had discovered that femininity, expression, and authenticity are not just external traits. They are reflections of an internal truth, a core identity that had been waiting to be acknowledged and celebrated all along. And in that acknowledgement, I found not only liberation, but profound joy. The most remarkable thing, looking back, is how natural it all feels now. There is no longer a question of identity, no lingering doubt, no hiding in shadows. I wake up each day with excitement, with curiosity, with gratitude for the person I see in the mirror and for the life I now live. Hormones changed my body, yes, but they also unlocked something far deeper: the ability to embrace myself completely, courageously, and joyfully. I learned that transformation is not merely about altering appearances. It is about discovering the full spectrum of your humanity, honoring your desires, and stepping into the world as the truest version of yourself. I am not just a product of science or circumstance. I am the culmination of courage, persistence, and self-love. And so, as I reflect on this journey, I understand the truth I could not have grasped at the beginning. Becoming feminine, embracing change, living authentically, it was never just about the external. It was about finding harmony, joy, and fulfillment within myself. It was about courage, honesty, and the unshakable belief that I deserved to exist fully and unapologetically. Hormones made me feminine, yes, but they also gave me something far greater: the freedom to love myself completely, to celebrate my identity openly, and to live a life that is entirely my own. And in that love, that joy, that authenticity, I finally discovered the most powerful transformation of all.